try to explain. And also feel free to redirect me, but I'll try to make the best use of your time. So, I don't know,
Bob, would you get the lights for me, please? Thank you.
Good enough.
okay, great. Can you see that then? All right, so what did we do? So Evansville School District asked us to come in, Community School District asked us to come in and do an IT assessment. So we looked at 4 specific areas. So this is technology, this is stuff maybe you don't think about every day, but needs to be there in order to keep things working. So we looked at your network infrastructure. That's how people can hook all these devices and communicate, talk to the internet and so forth. Wireless infrastructure, storage and backup infrastructure, and then the current phone system. Finally, we made recommendations on best practice on things that the district should include in their planning for the technology. Any questions?
Could I just ask a quick question
Sure.
about this? Will we be getting this in writing, or do we need, I'd like to listen and not take notes, but will we at some point get
I'll
a
have-
paper copy of this?
Yes, I'll make sure you get a paper copy. Absolutely.
Okay.
So first thing, looking at the network infrastructure, we did an assessment. One of the things to notice, half the equipment is obsolete or unsupported. So there is some old stuff there, it's still functioning. But when you look at the ages on the equipment, the important thing here is that a lot of that equipment's no longer supported by the manufacturer. Once the manufacturer stops supporting it, things like patching or things like fixing glitches or hardware or other things just aren't available. And so, you know, we provided that information to the district. You can make a business decision about what to do with that infrastructure. Obviously, our recommendation will be to replace it. The district eventually will require the ability to power phones and wireless access points. And I wanted to introduce this concept to you. It's called Power over Ethernet. When you picture a device, you've got that long blue cable oftentimes you see plugged into the device, plus you have the power device. So I want you to picture a electrician putting an outlet on the top of the gym to plug in a device. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. You wouldn't do that. So what you can do is you can have the network equipment over that blue cable that goes into the device actually has 8 wires that go into it. Over a couple of those wires, it can provide power right to the device. That gives you the ability to reduce your costs with electricians wiring outlets in the gym ceiling. But it also gives you the ability to move that equipment around, redeploy that equipment if needs be. So it gives you flexibility, saves you money, and so forth. So that concept is power over Ethernet. The current switching, there are a few switches that do support that, but the majority does not. So that's another kind of feature set that would be built into that infrastructure. So finally, you know, network is foundational. That's something that you want to be, have running with no single points of failure. So you know, sometimes you might experience that worked yesterday and it doesn't work today. The network needs to be needs to be solid and always working in order to build all those other services and things on top of it. Any questions?
Yeah, when you talk about phones, you're talking about hardwired telephones or cell phones?
Sure. In this case, I would be talking about voice over IP phones, which is most likely what the district would use moving forward if you know, when you replace the existing system. That's not wireless. We do have some discussion about wireless phones, which would not necessarily be cell phone technology either, but it would be phones that could be used within the district.
It's a hardwired phone, to answer your question, but more importantly, kind of thing, what's happened in the industry, across the industry, is they've combined separate wires for phones and separate for computers. So essentially, an Ethernet connection actually serves both.
And video, you can put video on the same system.
Do you have, when you put power and data on the same cable, do you have any problems with crossover or interference from the power source?
Sure. So with this type of voltage, no, and it's designed specifically, so you need to be within the right spec for the cabling. The cabling needs to be correct, and then the way that the cablers actually run those cables through the district to make sure that it doesn't collide with fluorescent lights and all sorts of other things. As long as that's done to spec, no.
The industry has also specified this particular standard, so multiple different devices and such are supporting to this standard. So you might find IP cameras kind of thing for surveillance. You can support printers this way. You can support again wireless access points. There's multiple different technologies and such that actually leverage this for the sake of less cabling and ease of moving those devices and such around as needed.
Okay, so voice assessment. So we took a look at the voicemails and the phone system at 3 different locations. So the first thing to note is that the current voicemail is failing and no longer supported, so it's old technology, but currently there's half the capacity is down because there's a card, something fried or something went wrong, right? What's important about that is the equipment's old enough that you might not be able to get replacement parts, or if you could, you might not be able to get support for changing the system. It's fairly old, it should be addressed. The current phone system is also no longer supported by the manufacturer. Again, here's a list of end of support dates on that equipment, which means as that equipment it becomes unsupported by the manufacturer, that whole channel of supporting it with dealerships and, dealerships, I don't know if that's the right term, but service centers and so forth, that's drying up as well. So, you're put into a position where it's gonna be difficult to repair it if it does fail, and that's kind of where you are now.
Are there third parties that do support
Sure.
those old systems?
I think there's a place in Milwaukee that the district currently uses. It's changed hands 3 times. And again, that's becoming rarer as time goes on. So, last thing on here is there's no local support, may not even be available. So, certainly there's not local support anywhere near, and also as fewer and fewer phone systems like that are out in the field, it's just gonna get harder and harder and harder, so. Any other questions about that?
I have one. Jim, districts across the state have various phone systems, and probably most of them are updated. How many are in the same type of situation where the type of phone system we have is outdated? Any idea out there where we stand versus other districts?
So my feeling or my kind of perceptions, you're behind. I mean, most districts have been pursuing replacing their infrastructure actively. So I put a phone system in Cambridge 10 years ago, or no, probably not. Yeah, almost 10 years ago, and it wasn't new technology at that time either. So I would say that this is you've probably gotten a lot of life out of this phone system. But as you start to integrate the phone system with other parts of your infrastructure, you just can't do that right now.
That sounds like a nice way of saying that we need to get something done.
Yeah, we talk about recommendations at the end, but yeah, I would put this as a priority. Phone system's important to the district. So server storage and backup, backup is running fine. That's a recent investment by the district, and it's performing as intended, so that looked great. Existing server and storage system is showing growing pains and will need more resources. I'm gonna show you a graph. The graph doesn't say it's bad. What the graph says is that it's being used, and we're starting to see signs where it's being used heavily, which means it's a clue for you to start planning for upgrades, either additional capacity or some changes. A lot of that becomes a financial decision as the infrastructure ages. So when you look at the spikes above 20, that means, wow, a lot of stuff happened at that point. Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. That's good. It's being used, but as time goes on, and if you do a little bit of growth, you will need to add capacity to that system. And then the equipment is aging. So again, here's a list of the ages. Normal lifespan on a server is 3, 5, 6 years. You have some a little bit newer and some of the older. So I would expect that those assets are going to turn over in the next few years and should be planned for accordingly. Any questions? Okay, so for wireless, the district does have wireless today. There's a number of, it's sort of an organic implementation of wireless. So there's, currently the wireless system's unmanaged, and what that means is, I think there's 80 to 100 devices. There's probably closer to 100 devices sprinkled throughout. There's several different manufacturers of those devices, but also they're currently not managed. So that means if you want to do an update, if you want to change something, you need to go to 100 endpoints to do that, and that's fairly inefficient. It does have limited capacity and access, so there's certain areas of the buildings where it probably performs great and it's working well. There's other areas probably doesn't perform very well at all, just because of the capacity. And it's difficult to see where any of those areas are, again, because there's no management. Lack of security and access control, really what we're talking about is some of them are just in classrooms, they're unmounted. They can be moved quite easily by a teacher if they decide that that's what they want to do. There's no way to really see what's happening there. And then access control, this is sort of a technical thing, but currently anybody who brings in a wireless device into the district can get an address from that access point, which means they're taking up resources. Now, because you have controls in place, they can't get out to the internet and do things that they shouldn't be doing or whatever, but it just takes up resources. And I think there's probably a lot of wireless devices coming into the district, and that's just gonna continue, right? So I guess there's other things, and this is just a highlight that was brought up, but there's no capability for guest access. So if you wanted to use the district right now to get access, it's not going to, it's not gonna work for you. It's not gonna be managed the way it should be for the district. I guess that's the last point on the wireless. We'll talk a little bit more about recommendations. Any thoughts behind wireless?
I think just one thing to stress is the fact that as you guys look to bring in new types of services, the wireless infrastructure currently will not handle that particular part. So although it might be sufficient in certain particular areas, as you potentially look to bring in more mobile devices or look to do anything additional on that wireless, that it was never designed for that. It's not really a, I don't want to call it a commercial grade, but it just doesn't have the functionality that is required in order to provide consistent, reliable connectivity. Please.
And does this cause things to work slower?
That is one symptom relative to yes. The whole idea is the fact that if you have an access point that is, some of the access points that you have in your environment now and such are technically home-based. They're designed to have you and, maybe your husband kind of thing connect to it, and that's about it. It's not designed to have 50 devices simultaneously connect to it. So there's that kind of intelligence built in. There's also types of intelligence such that you can actually roam between them. There's intelligence such that if normally, if you think of it relative to a volume, meaning like on a stereo control kind of thing, that the volume's actually turned down, but if it recognizes that multiple devices are hitting it, it actually has the ability to turn up. In fact, surrounding antennas will also, the surrounding access points will also boost their signal to fulfill that, and that's what allows you to have, say, 4 classrooms that all simultaneously brought in devices at the same time. Why is it that they don't have that problem and we do? Because they have the type of technology embedded in their wireless infrastructure that allows for that. And that's what's built into some of the new technology, whereas historically those technologies didn't exist. And from a cost perspective, there was a decision, I think, to introduce wirelessly as cost effectively as we could without future-proofing some of the bandwidth requirements. One additional point, and it was just a notation that I made to myself, is there is this trend towards that of offering much more services, and one of those requirements is connectivity. So as you have multiple different, whether it be applications or whether it be things via the internet or other things but in order to do that, one of the things that we focus on is planning connectivity. So it's not just that your stuff's old, you should get something new and it's got some cool management features. It won't handle the requirements that people will come to.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of us here, but is there anything we have existing that could be used with something new? Or new system, or do we have to start all over with everything?
Yes.
Some of your switches, some of your switches met the requirements. Jim will actually show some of that. So we're looking for switches that have that PoE that are able to supply that, so we're incorporating that. Any of the equipment that you have that doesn't meet that requirement or cut, there are actually trade-in values associated with that, so you do get some value back. So we're not just throwing it away or tossing it out, so there's specific programs that way.
So, this first phase is this assessment, and it's kind of laying the cards out on the table. Next phase would be more of a deeper design phase, where you'd look at some of those things. So we talked about 4 assessments, and so kind of, let's talk about what's critical. This is something we kind of collaborated on. First of all, the phone system, the voicemail, that is in what it's in dire straits. It should be addressed soon. So that's a criticality of 10, and that is something that's not dependent on these other changes. That's something that the district could do as just fixing that. The pilot would be if you think about the existing phone systems that you have in the 3 schools, they're all unsupported and off warranty, and it's getting harder and harder to find parts for it. But they're still working, right? So what the pilot is implementing that new phone system, or just the core of it, so that if you should lose a phone system in one of the buildings, you're ready to go. You just need to go ahead and make the purchase, buy the phones, and deploy the technology, and it's ready and set. All the business rules associated with who gets dialed when you call into the front desk and all those other things can be directed through that. So that's what the pilot is. It's not spending all of the money all at once, but it's getting that footprint in there. We call it a phone safety net, even, so that you can you're in a position where you can react and do something about it. And then the implementation we put as a lesser priority. Now remember, all these phone systems are out of support and they're old, but once you have that pilot in place, you can be more controlled on how you do the upgrade or how you go about that. So next step was the network. So again, the network has a lot of old equipment there. It is functioning, and there's some, not all of the equipment is out of date. So as far as like a priority, probably look at the phone system, the voicemail first. But planning for the network needs to be done, especially within the terms of the next technology plan or next 1, 2, 3 years and so forth. And I'll show a timeline at the end of this, kind of as a, I guess, a thought on how that would go. So then server and storage, that's functioning, it's great. If we think you're gonna need capacity, you should be prepared for that in budgeting, but it's not like it's on fire right now or anything. There's some minor improvements and recommendations we made. And finally, wireless. So wireless is interesting, and I wanna make sure I look at my notes, but when you think about wireless, the thing about wireless is it is a foundational network technology, but it also allows you to change things, allows you the way you do things in the classroom, for instance. If you picture a traditional classroom with wired computers all sitting in rows, that's quickly becoming more of an outmoded way of collaborating and working together. There's project-based learning where students can work in small groups with devices, but it's much more difficult to do that type of an opportunity with the wired network. Wireless supports that. Safety, either placing video cameras in certain areas, or perhaps it's simply communications on staff, being able to be mobile within the district. Wireless supports that. A lot of your parents, they would expect that they would be able to get connectivity as a guest, maybe when they come in. Wireless supports that. There's a whole bunch of use cases around wireless now that are, I think, pretty compelling. And as you go through and make a decision about what to do, those will be brought up to you specifically. But that's why wireless is a priority of 9. Not because you have to act on it right now, but because it's really an enabler for all these future things that are going to be in the technology plan. And I don't know if anybody has a question or comment on that.
Would going through the wireless, considering that the size of the campus that we have, and then the middle school being over there, if we went from middle school to here to high school, would we stay on the same wireless connectivity, or would we have to re-log in each time that we got into a different area?
That's a good question. I think right now it's scoped, you would have to, and a lot of that's dependent upon the device that you have, right? So if you had a district device and you had certain technologies available, then you could be anywhere and still have the same stuff come up. But that's most likely, starting out especially, you would have to reconnect.
It wouldn't be 3 different systems, though. You'd be able to
It would be one
basically-
system.
Yeah.
It would be one system, and it would know who you are. But I'm just thinking about the applications he's got running on that laptop.
Yeah, it is
So-
application specific, so you're gonna have some applications that require constant connectivity, you have other applications that are allowed to be dropped off. And like, so let's say that you had Internet Explorer, you just surfing the web, right? You left the school district, you're gonna lose connectivity until you come in here. It's gonna show the fact that you lost connectivity, but if you just hit, recycle, it's gonna
Or
find
even
it
just
again.
browse.
You're not gonna have to necessarily log into that connectivity.
So with our current system, it doesn't allow for multiple accesses, so multiple users, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. And let's say a student was in one classroom and needed to walk to another part of the building. It's pretty likely they're gonna lose connectivity going from one room to the next, because with the current system we have, because it doesn't support that.
They'll definitely have to relog in.
Your current system
Yes.
doesn't support roaming, so it doesn't allow it to go, and that's the other thing that's different with the The antennas, there's a handshake between, because it's part of one network, the access points that you have are called autonomous, which basically means they all function independently. They don't talk to one another. This actually has one controller, one mothership per se, that talks to all of its endpoints. And it actually does a handoff. So when you're actually walking down the hall with a device, and we can even sit back and actually have a mobile phone, say, on the network. So if we decided to just carry around a wireless phone, you'd be able to walk around the school kind of thing and be able to leverage the wireless infrastructure. We didn't go so far as to sit back and necessarily, it's not that you can't, but to negate cost, say that, do we have to cover every single stairwell and the boiler room, et cetera. But we specifically perform surveys, so we know the exact placement of those access points. We did that for the sake so that when we're looking at wiring, that we can specify where exactly those access points are. We're circling back with regards to surveillance, because we're gonna incorporate that so that we know where we would want those cameras, so that when we do the cabling, or when we have the cabling done, that we can place that, and then that in turn will determine the specific port density of the switches, or the switches that supply the connectivity to each one of those, dependent upon what kind of the quantity of cables and such that are coming back to any given closet.
So you would have, say, like, switches or routers at different spots, and they would know exactly how many people would be on that specific switch or router then?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Sure, that would be that part of that management function. You probably know sort of where they are.
A couple points of reflection here. First of all, from a voicemail perspective, in case the point wasn't hit, we can install an appliance for voicemail and plug it into your current phone system. Knowing that that's a problem, we said, hey, listen, we can hit that right out of the gate at any point, and knowing the fact that we have failing hardware, that's a quick hit. From a pilot perspective, although we did sit back and map to specific usage, so in other words, you have a phone sitting on your desk, we didn't sit back and interview and say, do you need that phone? Do you want that phone in that particular location? Do you need a phone with 2 lines or 4 lines? Do we want phones in new locations, et cetera, kind of thing. The point of the pilot is actually to specify that requirement so that we can actually whittle down the specific requirements, not just map to a one-for-one replacement. More importantly, though, the pilot, I've seen it far too often where schools will have an older system, they'll have a failure, and they'll throw, tons of money. I mean, it's easy to drop $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on fixing a system, all just to have a reband-aided solution. So you take that same dollar amount, you put it into a system. What a lot of people don't understand is when you install a system, besides figuring out the design, figuring out how they want it built in the first place, figuring out and establishing the connectivity and the like. So essentially, all we're doing is creating the template by which you would do the way the new systems are designed is it's basically an appliance that serves up all the different handsets. And we would choose a limited, let's say 10, 25, whatever it is kind of thing. And that design is already established in that pilot system. Actually, it's a full-blown deployment in a limited scale. And then if and when a particular school, that particular system failed, then all we would have to do is buy new handsets. And that's our contingency plan. And so you can sit back and say, we're gonna let this slide for X amount of time, or in the event of failure, we know what we're gonna do. That way, when we spend that $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, we spend it towards the outcome that we know that we want versus just band-aiding a previous system that we know we have to get rid of. Does that make sense?
Everything you've been talking about so far, as far as upgrades, seems like it's interior to the buildings. What about the exterior areas?
So so for the wireless, we've proposed, there's placement in there for covering the football field, for covering, I forget what the press box, those areas. So really, the way the way the survey was how can we provide coverage, and good coverage for good experience for users across the all the campuses. But, there are certain areas that you're still gonna have that we didn't do. So for instance, we didn't plan specifically for coverage in the stairwell shafts necessarily. And those are difficult to cover sometimes as well, and maybe not that useful for the district. But otherwise, most of the district is covered. And a survey was done where they actually went door to door, classroom to classroom, looking at how the signal, how strong the signal was in different locations to make sure that there was coverage.
Just to reiterate that point too, we test to a spec, so we know a specific density spec, and it is that density spec ensures the fact that if we have, as an example, 4 classrooms with, dense mobile, every student having a PC, et cetera, that would support that, without performance impacts and without, and at the same time, it also, that same spec provides for multiple different devices. So in other words, it's I don't want to say it's voice density, but that's one standard that some people will use, and that just means the fact that if I have a wireless phone and I walk up and down the hallways, et cetera, kind of thing, that you're going to be able to have a wireless device in any of the schools. And if you're somebody who needs to get a hold of, you can carry around one of those devices and check them out, that kind of thing. So it covers. We chose that spec such that we're able to, and basically what that means is it ensures that the proper overlap occurs, so that regardless of what you're throwing at it, no matter what you stack on it, kind of thing, that it's going to be able to handle that for today's need as well as the future need. So the other point, I guess, just to stress real quick, is the inner dependencies between that of wireless network and phone. Again, the phone system and the network is actually going to feed the network switches are going to feed the wireless APs as well as the telephones themselves, and as well as examples like surveillance or cameras, that kind of thing. So the importance is making sure that we have the appropriate density in each one of the closets to feed each one of the required areas with not overbuying. And there is a certain amount of consolidation there as well, so that's where some of the efficiencies and such occur, and that's the reason why the market's addressed it in that way. Sorry, Jim.
Okay, so finishing up here, so network infrastructure recommendations: replace the equipment that's outdated or unsupported. Reduce the risk of it going down, add redundancy. So there are some areas where there's just a single point of failure. I guess the report that we gave on replacing the network takes that into account to make sure that it's solid, the foundation's solid. Put in power protection. What if the lights went out? Today, if the lights go out, the computers go off, okay. Tomorrow, most likely, no matter what you use, then the phones might go out as well. So we have a placeholder in there just to back that up. And then focus on the foundation first. It's critical to everything else. So when you think about the network, that's the foundation. Any thoughts there? Voice assessment recommendation. The phone system is critical to the school district. First eliminate the risk of losing the voicemail. Then pilot the phone system so that you reduce your risk again, and you're ready, you're prepared if there is a failure, or you can take your time depending on what the district wants to do. And then finally, implement the new system across the district. Server storage and backup, recommendations. There's not